Shalom u'bracha. We're going to continue studying Be'ezrat Hashem the Sefer Chatzar Yosef that we have had the privilege to put together. We are studying chapter 8. This is part 2, and we are about to embark on the mission that the Maharal is going to put us on. Maharal, very important commentary. Maharal Miprag, Moreno Harav Lau Miprag, one of the biggest contemporary, mid-contemporary commentaries on the Gemara, especially on the Agadot section. He has a whole book that he wrote on explaining the stories of the Gemara. So just as a reminder, the story that we're talking about is the situation in Yerushalayim during the siege of the Romans in the end of the Second Temple era. And I'm just going to do a quick read-through of the Gemara itself just so we have a context of what we're talking about. The Gemara's page on page 77. I'm just going to read through it quick. Rome then sent Vespasian against Judea. Right, this is after the story of Kamta. It's after the story of Nero. He came and laid siege on Yerushalayim for 3 years. There were those 3 rich men in Yerushalayim. Their names were Naktimon ben Gurion, ben Kalbas Savua, and ben Tzitzita Keset. That was their monikers, their nicknames, how they were known by. The first one was called Naktimon ben Gurion. Why? Because Nakda, the sun, pierced for his sake. The second one was called Ben Kalba Savua, because anyone who came like a Kelev, Kalba, which is a dog, would leave Savua, satiated. The third one was called Ben Tzitzita Keset, because his tzitzit, the fringes of his garment, would drag upon kesatot, cushions. Some say that it was because his keset, meaning his seat, or his cushion where he sat, was placed amongst the greats of Rome. Some say it was also Yerushalayim. One of them said to the others, I will sustain them, meaning I will sustain the people of Yerushalayim who are inside the walls. I will sustain them with wheat and barley. And the other one said, I will sustain them with wine, salt, and oil. And the other one said, I will sustain them with wood. And the rabbis praised the one who gave the wood, as Rav Chazda would give all his keys to all of his storehouses to his servant, except for the one for the wood. He wouldn't give him that key. Since Rav Chazda said, a storehouse of wheat requires 60 storehouses of wood. All these details we have to explain. They had enough resources, thanks to these 3 rich men, to sustain the city for 21 years, says the Gemara. But there was the group called the Baryonim, which are the zealots, the passionate, fighters amongst the people, Jewish people who wanted to fight Rome. The sages said to them, let us go out and make peace with the Romans. But the zealots, the Baryonim, did not allow them to do so. They forcibly took control of the inside of the city pretty much. The zealots said to the sages, let us go and make battle with the Romans. But the sages said to them, the matter will not be successful. The zealots arose and burnt down the storehouses of wheat and barley, and there was a famine. That is the first part of that story. We went through some of the commentaries in part 1. Now we're continuing on page 79 of the commentary. Maharal. Says the Maharal, the nation of Israel was founded on the concept of 3. He's going to try to explain the meaning of these 3 rich men. He says all of Am Yisrael was founded on the concept of 3. Such as by the 3 forefathers, right? They started the nation, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. The 3 lineages that we have. Everyone is either a Kohen, a Levi, or Israel. 3 major lineages. This is their power. As it says, Yaakov, Chevel Nahalato, which means Yaakov is the rope. The rope is his inheritance. That's the Pasuk in Tehillim. The rope is his inheritance. What does that mean? Meaning, Israel has strength as a sturdy rope, which is made up of 3 cords. As it says in another verse in Kohelet 4:12, Chuta meshulash lo bimhayanatek, which means a 3-ply cord, rope, will not hastily disconnect. So when you have a rope that has 3 parts in it, 3 cords in it, that's you make the rope out of, it's going to have strong sturdiness and it won't disconnect easily. And the same idea runs through Am Yisrael. That cord runs through Am Yisrael. They're tripled in that sense. Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Kohen, Levi, Israel. The only way for a foreign nation to subjugate and defeat them was through the concept of three. So they had to use the three to defeat the Jews' three. Which is why the siege lasted for specifically 3 years, says the Maharal, to tap into that power of three, fire against fire. Each of the three rich men was able to sustain the city for 7 years, totaling 21 years, as the Gemara mentions. So the Maharal adds that detail, because the Gemara says 21 years, Maharal says, okay, 3 guys, 21 years, that means each one of them could have himself sustained all of them for 7 years each.
Didn't each one of them have their own resource?
The Gemara says that each one of them offered a certain resource. It doesn't mean they didn't have other ones. You know what I mean? They could have had everything. This quantity of 7 years per person is significant, says the Maharal, because a famine that lasts 7 years is the ultimate defining measurement of true famine, as we find in Paro's dream, right? Everything has a precedent in Torah. And we find in the Torah the dream that Paro had, which Yosef had to interpret, and Yosef interpreted as indicating a 7-year famine, right? Remember the whole dream over there, where Paro saw 7 cows that were scrawny, who ate up the 7 fat cows. So, and that was a sign of famine. And Yosef interpreted that this means a famine. So you see that the concept of 7, it wasn't just any famine, it was a huge famine, like a worldwide super famine. And that's the idea here, that 7 always means an idea of completeness, of like the ultimate in the physical world. When something is to the degree of 7, that's like the highest it could be in the physical world. Right? We're going to explore that as well throughout the book. And you'll see it'll be clearer later on. But with the basic idea is because of anytime you want to find out what a true concept means in Torah, what is the bottom line, the core of a concept in Torah, you have to look at the first place it shows up in the Torah. And the first place the concept of 7 shows up in the Torah is by Shabbat, the 7th day upon which God created the world. And over there, look at the text, the verses, it says, everything was completed, the heaven and the earth was completed on the 7th day. That means 7 equals completion, the ultimate climax. That's what it is. So here, like what the dream of Paro, there were 7 cows to show you that there is an ultimate complete famine like no other. Thus, each of these 3 men were able to prevent a 7-year famine, right? And so the Maharal is doing this calculation. Since each one of them had the power to sustain them for 7 years, that means they had so much wealth that by extension they had the ultimate complete wealth, each one of them, on their own, with their resources, making them the epitome of wealthy. That's the point. Thus, these 3 rich men represent 3 distinct, corresponding conceptual categories. Yes, I like alliteration. Corresponding conceptual categories. What do they represent, says the Maharal? Their respective representative categories explain their names as well, their respective types of wealth that they had, and their respective resource that they were prepared to sustain the city with. And he goes one by one. The first guy was Nachimon ben Gurion. Had the first type of wealth, which is wealth of blessing, wealth of abundance. I'm sorry, that's the second one. Wealth of blessing. What does that mean, wealth of blessing? Where the blessing of his wealth made it apparent that it was directly from Hashem. And that's the point. He was wealthy to the point where everyone knew that he did nothing. It was all straight from God. This is evident from the story of his namesake, of Nakda, that the son Nakda pierced for him. We said the story of his namesake last week. There's a story in Masechet Ta'anit about how the sun shone through the clouds on a very rainy day at a time when it wasn't supposed to, just for him. Which is a supernatural sign to all that his blessing is directly from Hashem. The resource that he was prepared to provide was wood. So now, the Gemara doesn't say this. This is the Maharal connecting the dots. The Maharal says that the resource Naktimon was prepared to provide had to be the wood. Which points to the concept of multiplicity, the concept of more, he says. Wood equals multiplicity, more. How? Since wood was needed in much higher quantity than the other resources. As Rav Chasda and our Gemara explained, right? What did he say? He said you need 60 storehouses of wood to use one storehouse of wheat. What he means by that is presumably to cook, to bake the wheat into bread. You need fire. Where do you get the fire from? The wood. So the amount of fire you need to bake 1 unit of wheat is 60 times that, apparently. That's how Rav Chasda said it. So therefore you see that the wood, quantity-wise, was needed at the highest quantity. That's why it points to multiplicity. This fits because his type of wealth was that of blessing. And blessing is defined by having or revealing that there was always more. Hence the concept of multiplicity. So let me just explain that a little bit. The word beracha in Hebrew, the true essence of the word just means more than you expected, literally. So what does that mean? It's hinted in the word. Everything is hinted in the word. Hebrew is the ultimate code, as we know. The word beracha, the shorish, the root of the word, is bet resh chaf. Bet resh chaf. Each letter has a gematria. Each letter has a numerical value. The numerical value of bet is 2. The numerical value of resh is 20, and of chaf, which is the last letter of the word, is 200. So 2, 20, 200. What does that mean? It points to the concept of 2, and we'll see later on in chapter 21, we'll go very deep into it. But the concept of 2 is the first step away from 1. 2 is the first step of multiple things rather than just one thing. Right? 2 is the door that opens up to abundance. Before 2, everything is singular. So in this name, and in the word beracha, berech, all you have is 2s, and it's exponentially growing. 2, 20, 200. Right? The concept of 2 runs through it, because it means multiplicity. So beracha means that there's multiple things. There's more things in that thing that has the blessing than what you expected. That's why, for example, people say it's one thing to be rich and have numerically, quantitatively a lot of money. It's another thing to have beracha in your money. What does it mean beracha in your money? A guy could be working a regular 9-to-5 job, or not even working a part-time job, making $50,000 a year, but he's able to pay the mortgage, he's able to pay his kids' tuition, he's able to pay all these things that you know what's coming. There's no how, but it's happening. He pays his groceries. There's more in there than he expected. He gives tzedakah. But the guy was a multi-millionaire, owning 20 to 30 different properties. When he does the net calculation, his accountant tells him at the end of the day, you're negative. At the end of the month, you're in the red. Because he has all these expenses and problems and this. That's the difference. It's about having beracha in the money. So, that's what it means. There's more in the money than what you expected. And that's what he's saying here, multiplicity, more. And that connects to the wood, because wood was there was more of it, a lot of it. And that was Nachtimon ben Gurion, that was his wealth. Gemara mentions that the sages praised the one who offered wood, which was Nachtimon. They praised him specifically because he had the most potential to give to others. I should say he had the most potential to give to others. Why? Since it was the most abundant compared to the rest of the resources being offered. The more you have of something, the more you can give, right? And since he had the wood, he just explained that wood was 60 times more than everything else, so he had the most. Since he had the most opportunity to give. And that's why he was praised by the Chachamim. This corresponds as well, he says the Maharal, to the midah of chesed. So we haven't really explored too much the midot yet. We will in this book eventually. Bezat Hashem, very deep. But we're just giving little hints here and there so far. It's connected to chesed. Number 17, the note on the bottom. Chesed is one of the midot of Hashem, one of the 10 sefirot. It's defined by limitless giving. It is precisely for this reason that the rabbis praised this one specifically over the other two rich men and what they had to offer, because he was connected to chesed. That's one of the main themes of 3 as well, right? One of the main themes of 3, besides what he said about Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and they're also actually tied into this, is the relationship between the three major lines of attributes within the 10 Sefirot by which God manages the world. And that is Chesed, Din, and Rachamim. Chesed is the right, Din is the left, Rachamim is the middle. We're going to explore this very deep in chapter 15. Right now it's a little early. But Nakdimon, we're saying, is connected to the concept of Chesed, of ultimate giving. Chesed means giving without expecting anything back. Giving and in a situation where the receiving party is not necessarily 100% deserving of what you're giving them, but you give anyway, and you give and you give and you give. That's Chesed.
Why isn't the other two guys, especially the guy who fed the people, considered Chesed? Because he would feed even though they were
So he's gonna. Oh, I mean that's a Ben Kaba Sabua. So that's a good point. So he would give even though they weren't like deserving. That was the opinion not of the Maharal though. That was the opinion of the Eshkol HaSofer. So maybe the Eshkol HaSofer would say, yeah, he was the one who would give Chesed. Again, this is the Maharal's opinion. But the beautiful thing about these three things, about Midot in general, the Sefirot, is that within each Sefirah, each one of these 10 emanations, the principle is that everything in the world, everything in existence, God programmed to run by these 10 Sefirot, including the Sefirot. Which means you take a Sefirah, take Chesed, you open it up, inside you have top to bottom, all 10 Sefirot again. So within each Sefirah, you have the other ones working also in tandem. And each one of those also you open up infinitely, will have the 10 Sefirot in them. So basically it's not exclusive. It's not something is only Chesed and period. Something's only Din and period. No, things overlap all the time. Because there's a thing within a thing within a thing. So there could be a Din within a Chesed. There could be a Chesed within a Din, as we'll see. So you could explain it that way also. Okay? So that was Nakdimon. He's Chesed, which is in fact the source for Nakdimon's blessing, says the Maharal. It is fitting that he offered the wood because naturally the wood of a tree has no ta'am, taste of its own. Right? It's actually a big Kabbalistic topic about how God, when he wanted to create the original trees, he wanted the bark to taste like the fruit as well. And that also had to do with what led to the sin of Chava and Adam. Very interesting stuff that Mishneh brings it down. But the way it ended up being was that the earth sprouted trees in this world where the bark does not taste like the fruit. Rather, it gives all the flavor to the fruit, right? The bark of the tree and the tree itself, it's designed to squeeze all its flavor into the actual fruit. So too, the type of giving that Chesed gives, right? The midah of Chesed. The type of giving that it gives is that of no ta'am. Same word. But here it means no reason. The word ta'am means taste and reason. And they're both intricately connected. They both basically mean the same thing. The reason for something is to give you a taste to understand why. Right? When you serve God without knowing reasons, ideally you should serve no matter what. You're a soldier. But people love to know reasons. What's the reason behind this? What's the reason God said to do mitzvah this way? What's the reason why the Chachamim made this law? What's the reason, Rabbi? What's the reason? And the reasons, once you tell them the reason, it allows the person to enjoy and it allows the service of God to taste better in his mouth, so to speak. So reason and taste are really one thing. So that's why he puts it over here. He says, just like the wood has no taste, there's no ta'am, so too Chesed is a giving without a ta'am, without a reason. Just a giving, like we said. In as much as it is an unconditional type of giving, like we said. Okay. That was the whole thing on Nakdimon ben Gurion. Next guy was Kalba Savua, Ben Kalba Savua. He had the second type of wealth that the Maharal is suggesting, which is wealth via natural sustenance. Note number 19. Maharal suggests that Kalba Savua's wealth was obtained through mazal, meaning that was what was written. That was what was destined for him when he was born. He was born under a certain constellation, right? The mazalot, the constellations, are basically the filters through which influence is poured from Shamayim downwards. It's a default system. The mazal is the default system. Okay. People are very into horoscopes and things like that, and the truth of the matter is, if you believe that the horoscope is your end-all be-all and you cannot avoid it and there's nothing you can do, that's what will happen. But the Torah teaches us through Avraham Avinu that God chose Abraham and his descendants to be above the mazal, to have power over that, to not be limited by it. Nevertheless, there is a default. Everything is born, everyone who is born in the world has a default system. Right? Even the Gemara speaks about mazal in a few places. And basically the idea is, as Rabbi Tatz explains in the name of his Rabbi Moshe Shapira, that it's a default system, and if you believe it to the point wholeheartedly and you believe there's nothing more, you will be bound by it. But if you know as a power that you have the power that God vested in you as a Jew to be above it and to actually influence the upper world, which then boomerangs back down into your world, then the mazal cannot limit you. You can change whatever's there. You can change the wealth, the health, whatever's there, you can change that. Okay?
If you're limiting yourself to the mazal, isn't that a form of idolatry?
To an extent, yes. To an extent. Because all the Rambam famously writes, all of the original idol worshippings at the time, the paganisms, were rooted in the mazalot, were rooted in a certain constellation, right? That's where it started, because they knew that was a filter through which some heavenly power is bringing things down. And then from there, it evolved and it grew into statues representing them, and etc., and trees, etc., etc. Okay? So, Maharal wants to say that Kalba Savua's wealth was just his mazal. He was born at the right time, under the right constellation, and his mazal will stand for him, and he didn't have to do anything. He just had to take it, accept it. Didn't have to work. He wasn't poor, then he had to pray to God to change himself to become rich. He was just rich from the get-go. Day one. Meaning it was predestined for him, and he acquired it seemingly naturally by virtue of successful business. Nakdimon Bergunion's wealth, on the other hand, was more miraculous in nature. Right? Because Nakdimon in general was a miraculous guy. The sun shone for him. That's the point. He's the guy of miracles. So it could be that his mazal was not that, but nevertheless, because of his righteousness and his praying and all that, God gave it to him. Kalba Savo was not like that, though. The resource that he offered, says Maharal, Kalba Savo, what did he offer? Was wheat and barley. This corresponds to the attribute of Rahamim, right? So we're talking about the triple of that attribute of those three midot. We're going to see this throughout the book a lot. Chesed, Din, and Rahamim. Rahamim is the middle path. He says Kalba Savo was Rahamim, the middle path. Why? Since wheat and barley is the primary form of sustenance in which Hashem sustains man with. That was the main bread, literally the main food, make bread with, so that he will not be lacking. Look at number 20. We explain more just to make it more understandable. Note 20. The midah, the attribute of Rahamim, one of the main staples of it is that it provides, just like Chesed gives, right? Chesed gives. Rahamim, which is also called Tiferet, by the way, gives also, but it only provides exactly what is needed and no more. That's the perfect type of giving. You give the person exactly what they need so that they can be independent. You don't give and give and give and give so that they're always dependent on the giver. Right? Chesed just doesn't care, gives endlessly, flows out. Rachamim says, okay, we're going to give, but exactly what you need so that you can develop. Right? So that's what I say over here in the note. Chesed, on the other hand, provides in great abundance, much more than what is needed. The theme of Chesed and Rachamim will be expanded in its proper place in the Chatzar Yosef in chapter 15 below. That's going to be a very, very interesting, deep chapter. I hope we get there. B'ezrat Hashem, with God's help. We're still in chapter 8 though. Okay. So how, he explains, so therefore, how does that connect back to the wheat and barley? Wheat and barley is basically the staple of a meal. A person can survive by just eating bread, nothing else, just bread. That's the main part of the meal. If a person ate bread for a long time in his life, he would survive. It's exactly what it needs to survive. Right, that's the point. That's why it's like Rachamim. In a certain way, Kalba Savo was blessed with the attribute of Chesed as well, though, says the Maharal. Just like Avraham Avinu, since the word Savua, which means satiated, which is exactly what Chesed does. Since the word Savua means satiated, which is exactly what Chesed does, it satiates. Right, so I mean, the word satiation is in his name, Savua. And that's what Chesed does as well, it satiates. Again, Chesed and Rachamim are very related, as we explained. We'll explain when we get to that chapter, that Rachamim is a giving, but it's a perfection of the chesed. Because the whole point is the chesed. The whole point of the story of what God wants to do is to give. And chesed is the ultimate giver. It's just that when you give too much, it's detrimental. That's why you have to control the giving. That controlling, the regulation of the giving is actually the second phase, which is din, as we'll explain here. The third phase is rahamim, where you're giving again, but only exactly what you need.
Isn't rahamim also satiation?
Yes, exactly. That's what I was getting to. So rachamim and chesed are really closely related. Rachamim is satiation, but it's the perfection of the giving. It's the perfect type of the satiation. So that's why he says that they're related and they go together, right? The rachamim basically brings out what chesed really intended from the beginning. Just chesed didn't have a valve to stop it. That's the point. Ben tzitzit keset, this is the third guy now, had the third type of wealth via prominent social status. That was his wealth, his socialism. Not socialism, but his social status. Since he sat amongst nobility, as our Gemara explains, the resource that he offered was the oil and the wine, which are fitting for him since they are items of importance in comparison to all other liquids. They are usually served on the table of kings, right? Oil and wine are in halakha also in many different places. Masechet Terumot speaks about it. In the laws of blessings, they have special blessings on their own, right? To say a blessing on a grape is ha'etz. But once you make it into the liquid, into the wine, it gets an elevated blessing, a more refined blessing of gefen. And another example, even olive oil. Blessing on an olive is ha'etz. Blessing on olive oil, if you added things to make it tasty, because by itself it's bitter, and if the olive oil is the majority, it's machlok in the poskim, but bottom line, if it's a majority, it still retains the blessing of ha'etz. So if someone were to make a cocktail, which they used to make, a cocktail, the Gemara speaks about cocktail called anigaron, with beet juice and olive oil, that was made to soothe the person's throat when he was sick. The majority there, some say it was the majority, some say even though it wasn't the majority, since it's the main thing, the olive oil was the main ingredient there, and the blessing is borei pri ha'etz, on the tree, creator of the tree, which is unusual because usually fruit juice becomes sha'akol. If you make strawberry juice, watermelon juice, peach juice, any other juice in the world besides olives and wine, olives and grapes, it gets downgraded to sha'akol ni'abdevaro, which is a more generalized blessing. But olive oil retains borei pri ha'etz if you make a cocktail out of it. Why? Because these two fruits are elevated. The grapes and the olives. Therefore, the olive oil and the wine, they're elevated. They're fit for elevated people. The likes of who he sat with.
It's not they're considered a luxury, so they're considered...
You could call them luxurious to an extent. At that time. For us, everything is, available.
Wine necessary for Kiddush.
So you're looking at the definition of luxurious as being the opposite of a necessity.
Yeah.
So that's not what we're saying. We're not saying that. We're saying it was, what's the word I'm looking for? Important, basically. It had importance. Chashivut is the word in English. Chashivut, specialty, importance, something like that. Not necessarily luxurious. It's not like a Rolls Royce. You know what I mean? But it's up there. They're usually served. Okay, this corresponds to the attribute of din, which is the second phase. Din, since these items have ta'am, they have flavor. Ta'am means flavor, means taste, means reason. Right? We explained, and everything that occurs because of the attribute of din, right? The attribute of din only operates always as a ta'am, as a reason, as we explained before. Right? Chesed gives without any reason, without any ta'am. Rahamim, wow, look at this guy. I'm talking about Rahamim, Rahamim comes in. Baruch Hashem. Actually, I'm talking about Din. Din, you can get a copy downstairs, or take this copy. Yeah, take this copy. Din means judgment. It means the law. For judgments and law, there's always a reason. You get exactly what you deserve. That's what it means. Judgment is when there's no favor given. There's nothing given. Everything is exactly to the T, to the point of what a person deserves. If there's a reason for what you get, then we'll give it to you. Exactly. And the word exact, he's connecting exact to reasoning. There's reasoning for everything. There's tam for everything. And oil and wine have tam. So that's the point. That's how it connects. Nakdimon was also blessed in certain ways with the attribute of Rahamim as well. So you see, these three things are separate, but at the same time they overlap. So Nakdimon, who we said was Chesed, is now also he's saying Rahamim to an extent. His namesake is based on the miraculous fashion in which Hashem dealt with him, as we said. The miracles are sourced in the attribute of Rahamim. He's saying miracles, the concept of nes, miracle, comes from Tiferet, which is Rahamim. Same attribute. God only changes nature to perform miracles in times of need, not for no reason, not stam, just to show himself. If there's a reason for the miracle and there's a deserving for it, he will perform it, which is what Rachamim is. It provides that which is needed at the time of its need. That's what we said.
Isn't that also like Deen?
Is what like Deen?
It's a reason to provide something?
Right, but Deen is less associated with giving. Mm-hmm. Deen is more associated with holding back and not giving, setting limits. Mm-hmm. Rachamim and Chesed are the givers. Chesed is the super giver, and Rachamim is the perfect giver. Right? So he says, just like for a miracle to work, it needs to be perfect, it needs to be a time of need. Right? If you look at every miracle in Tanakh that ever occurred, there was a need for it. Right? Example, splitting of the Yam Suf. The Egyptians were over there, pursuing them. The ocean was over there. There's a need. God did a miracle. Right? That's Rachamim. That is why Yaakov, right? So we'll explore this later as well, but each of the Avot, Avraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, each one of them correspond to one of these midot. Avraham is Chesed, Yitzhak is Din, Yaakov is Rachamim. This is why Yaakov, the forefront of Rahamim, experienced so many miracles. We're saying miracles is from Rahamim, such as the sun setting early for him as well. There was a time when the sun set early for him. Look at note 22. See Bereshit 32. That's where it talks about it. Maharal compares Nakdimon to Yaakov in this way because they were both blessed with miracles, which come from the attribute of Rahamim, and both of them experienced miracles that had to do with the sun. So for Nakdimon, the sun shone at a time it wasn't supposed to shine for him, like we said in last week's story of Ta'anit. And for Yaakov, the sun actually set early for him when he first met at the place in the Beit HaMikdash where he was supposed to pray out of Eat. And the sun also rose early for him, and that we actually have a whole chapter on that at the end of the book, on that very incident. So we'll hopefully, with God's help, get there as well.
Is a miracle ever just chesed?
Is a miracle ever just chesed? Well, like I said, everything has a drop and a hint of everything in it. So yes, I would say yes, to an extent, absolutely.
Abraham also went through, he had miracles performed for him.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, he didn't burn, right?
Right.
It's also miraculous because...
Yeah, but you could say there's a need there too.
Those like when he fought the kings, there was miracles during that war that he fought the kings with.
Right, but again, all these things, there was a need for them. So you can explain that they're from Rahamim.
I don't think Yitzhak really had that many miracles except for maybe him not dying.
Him not dying? Oh, he was the epitome, bro. He was the epitome of miracle. When according to the Zohar, he got sacrificed, but he stayed alive.
Saying besides that, he's Gevurah. Technically, he shouldn't have any miracles.
It's not true. See, that's what I'm saying. Again, I want to reiterate what I said. Just because somebody or something is associated with a certain midah, it doesn't mean it's exclusive to that and everything else is pushed off. It doesn't mean miracles only happen to Rachamim now. It means that they're more associated with Rachamim, but they can be everywhere because again, each piece, each attribute, you open it up, has the 10 sefirot in there. So inside Din, there's Rachamim. You understand? Everything needs to be analyzed and explained in its own context. It's just showing correlations. These are not steadfast black and white rules. They're correlations. Okay? Okay. This is why Yaakov, Rachamim, experienced so many miracles, sun setting, because he suffered much in his lifetime, meaning there were many times that he was in such need for miracles. He had a lot of suffering in his life. Right? Number 23, we give you a list. The trials he had with Lavan, Esav, Dinah, his daughter, Rachel, and Yosef. He went through a lot. Right? Yaakov. So he had a lot of times where there was need. Look at number 24. The Maharal thus explains how the wealthy man who was blessed from the attribute of Chesed, right? This is Naktimon ben Gurion. He started saying that he was from Chesed, that he's connected to Chesed, Naktimon ben Gurion. At the end of his piece, he explained how he was also in a certain way blessed with the attribute of Rahamim, and that the wealthy man who was blessed with Rahamim was also blessed with Chesed. Right? Remember, he did both of those things. So he said Naktimon was Chesed, but also kind of Rahamim, and then he said Ben Kabasavo was Rahamim, but also kind of Chesed. The concept in the deeper wisdom is that, I already said this before, but now this is much cleaner. I'll reiterate. The concept in the deeper wisdom is that the perfect manifestation of Rahamim is actually when it tilts slightly towards Chesed. So we said Rahamim is a middle balance, it's a middle. But it's not a 100% 50-50 middle. The perfect Rahamim is that it has to be slightly tilted to the right, towards Chesed. Since Chesed is the ultimate goal, that's why God created the world, to give Chesed, but a controlled form of that Chesed. The best form of Chesed is a controlled form of it. In other words, the goal of Chesed is to achieve Rachamim, and the role of Rachamim is to reveal the ultimate Chesed. And so the two are intricately connected. This will be explained better and further in chapter 15 below. Patience. Last paragraph in the Maharal. Regarding Ben Tzitzit Keset's name, there was two explanations in the Gemara for that. The two explanations for his name our Gemara provides hint at two different types of importance that he had. The explanation that his tzitzit would drag on cushions imply an importance that correlates with Israel, which is a spiritual importance, right? Am Israel. Since tzitzit is a precious and holy mitzvah that only Am Israel is commanded to do, and the reason why it's so precious and holy is due largely to the techelet. The techelet is the blue part of it, right? Nowadays, machloket, whether or not you should wear the blue one that they have now, whole thing, I don't want to get into that. But the Torah commands a blue special dye that should be on some of the strings. And that was a component of it, right? And techelet is a royal material. It was known that royal people wore techelet. It was a very expensive dye. Look at number 26 in the bottom. I'll give you a proof. As it says in Esther, in the Megillat Esther, it says Mordechai came out from in front of the king in kingly clothing. This is when Haman was pulling him through the streets, right? When the king said, "Oh, Haman, it's a great idea. You should go take him," right? So it says over there that he had techelet on him. When Mordechai was being pulled like a king, he had techelet on him. So you know techelet is a kingly royal thing. The explanation that the seat that Ben Tzitzit Kesed sat was amongst the nobles of Rome implies an importance in the Roman sense, the Roman importance, meaning in the socio-economic sense. Since the word Romi, Resh Vav Mem Yud, Rome, is the root word for the Hebrew word Romemut, which means a high stature. Rom means very, very high in Hebrew. High and lofty, that's what it means. It is possible that both opinions are true and they do not argue against each other. So the Maharal says both opinions in our Gemara explaining Ben Tzitzit Kesed are true, that his tzitzit dragged, and also he sat amongst the nobles of Rome.
This guy was a Roman and he had tzitzit?
He wasn't Roman, he was Jewish. But he was rich, he was filthy rich. He was an important man. Actually, his daughter, if I'm not mistaken, his daughter married Rabbi Akiva. The whole story of Rabbi Akiva. Yeah. Daughter married. That's brought down Masech Ketubot, Dav Samech Bet, I believe over there, 62. It talks about him. Talks about this whole thing about how Rabbi Akiva was poor, and the girl wanted to marry him because she saw potential for him to be a Talmid Chacham. So if you study, I'll marry you. And the father, he was so like, what are you talking? You're going to marry this peasant? He excommunicated her. Then he became a huge Talmid Chacham. He came back with a bunch of students. And the father met him one day, didn't recognize him. They started kissing his feet, all these things. And they gave him like half his money. So it pays to be a Talmid Chacham. Like, I'm not saying you should look for payment if you're a Talmid Chacham. I'm not saying that. I am not saying that. Okay, continuing now. Rashash. The Rashash, now there's two different Rashashes. There's a Rashash who is Rabbi Shalom Shara'abi, which is a huge Mekubal, who writes a very famous Sidur with a bunch of different configurations of God's names. That's a different Rashash. The Rashash we're talking about now is a commentary on Rashi at the back of many of the Gemaras you'll find. Rabbi Shmuel Strachan. I don't know how to pronounce it. We're just going to read this and we'll be done for the day because we're over time. So Rashi says that Rashi mentions that the Baryonim, the Zealots, also burned down the storehouses of wood. Right? So remember, that was a very important question that we asked. The Gemara says that they burnt down the wheat and barley storehouses. Rashi says, oh, you know what? They also burnt down the wood storehouses. Our question was, hold on, Rashi, how do you know that? Where do you get that from? So the Rashash identifies this issue, but our Gemara only mentions, he says, the burning down of the wheat and barley storehouses. In truth, just this would suffice. Meaning it would be enough to just understand that all they did was burn down the wheat and barley. Since if there was no more wheat and barley, what benefit would the wood serve? What are you going to cook if there's nothing to cook? The wood is for firewood, right? So the Rashash has a problem with Rashi. Number 28. In other words, there is no use in using firewood if there is no flour to bake. Rashash seems to be disagreeing with Rashi, implying that Rashi's mention of the wood storehouses being burnt down is extra and superfluous. That's how it seems that Rashash is writing it. And it's going to play an important role in our analysis in the Chatzar Yosef. So we just have the Ben Yehoyada to do, the last commentary. Next week, B'ezrat Hashem, we'll do that, and then we'll dive in to the journey of the Chatzar Yosef, which is actually not that long. We might be able to finish it next week. Baruch Adonai Olam, Amen ve'amen.